Everybody hear me, Weston team?
We can hear you fine.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. And thank you for meeting with us today. My name is Adrian. This is Leah.
Hi.
And this is Brian. Hello. We're excited to present to you our findings for the potential future of the Case campus. All right, so let's start off with a basic overview of the Case site and the goals put forth by Weston. So right here is a quick site breakdown of the major facilities on campus. You got your 4 schools, the senior/community center, the pool, and the library. And this picture was taken right from Google Earth and put right in. Going a bit further, we took a look at how much energy the campus consumes per year. The chart here you see is taken from MEI and shows all the different types of energy sources that these buildings consume. And as you can see, 3 out of 5 out of the 6 buildings are in your top 5 consumers, notably from consuming gas for heating. So after meeting with Weston via Zoom, we were able to narrow down a concise outline of goals for the Case campus. These goals include campus islandability, which is the site's ability to function independently of an outside energy provider like the grid or any sort of gas or oil company. And in order for islandability to be reliable, site resiliency is paramount. And in order to meet Weston's goals of progressive decarbonization as well, renewable energy infrastructure had to be implemented too. So after outlining Weston's goals, we then had to define the project's goals. In order to facilitate the transition towards a renewable microgrid, we first had to evaluate the feasibility of both a geothermal microdistrict and a PV microgrid. And we'll get into all that stuff soon. After that comes communicating and visualizing the solutions, which is this presentation right here. And then that leads to providing general implementation plan to integrate with the existing capital plan for the Weston going forward. Following this logic to define our project goals, we then created this strategy right here. Our proposed strategy to achieve Weston as well as our project goals is to create a strategically phased implementation of a standalone district energy system for heating, cooling, and electric resiliency while integrating and updating the existing infrastructure. And in order to be successful, our strategy required a lot of logical phasing and systems integration. All right, so this graph is a quick overview of the integrated systems. This graph will come up again, or this chart will come up again later in the presentation, but I just want to outline a couple things quickly. As you can see, we have solar photovoltaics, we have solar thermal, both in the yellow circles, and we also have the electric micro district. And these will be the 3 main systems that help to power the island of Weston. So passing it on to Brian, he's going to discuss the photovoltaic aspect of this plan. Brian?
Control the slides. Can I just slide in? Because I just want to control the slides. I've got some stuff I want to control here. Do that. All right. Hello. Well, thank you, Adrian. I just want to take a little time here to talk mainly about the electric component of our recommended system. We're going to mainly do this by focusing on the introduction of a renewable and resilient microgrid system. So let's first just zoom in on that part about resiliency. The first thing, and probably the easiest thing that can help to facilitate this, is the installation of batteries. There are modern battery bank type systems that can tie into a building's power supply and can serve as an intermediary between the grid supplying electricity and the parts of the building that consume electricity. This can allow the batteries to serve as a sort of a capacitor, smoothing out any variability in the supply voltage, solving the issues brought up in our meeting with the town, where there was unreliable supply voltage messing with sensitive electronics. The batteries can also simply just supply power on their own, assisting the generator in bearing the load of an outage and potentially absorbing small momentary outages all on their own. The second component here would include expansion of existing photovoltaic solar energy generation. The field school currently has solar panels on the roof, but expanding these facilities to all other buildings with modern panels would move the campus closer to the energy island mentioned earlier, while introducing massive gains in renewable energy. Moving in the direction of an energy island allows the campus to be able to survive long-term power outages, as well as reduce energy costs for the school, with energy even returning to the grid at times, which brings money into the school district. There will be a few calculations and graphs few slides here that are based on a system that includes solar panels, batteries, and a medium-sized diesel generator. This combination, according to some simulations, can survive power outage lasting over a week. Third component would include a sort of energy storage using thermal storage, using excess solar energy to feed into the ice thermal storage already present on the library. So when you have excess solar generation, you can just feed that into the existing chiller there, allowing some of the energy to be stored easier. And this allows for further local utilization of the photovoltaic solar generation. So shown here quickly is just an output from a tool put out by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory called REOPT, using the energy figures from the buildings on the actual Case campus. The tool outputs some ballpark size figures for recommended solar installations, battery installations, and generator installations to meet certain goals like resiliency and dependence on renewable energy. I bounded the battery size figures to give a reasonable size for the battery bank, kind of something that's commercially available. So over here, so these calculations show that the campus can meet the resilience goals of being able to survive a week-long power outage with a 1,200 kilowatt solar array, 135 kilowatt hour battery capacity, and medium-sized 160 kilowatt generator. This size generator can generally supply one average size commercial building. So here with these improvements, this one generator can actually supply power for the whole campus. So introducing the solar and storage system can reduce load on any existing diesel generators, increasing their reliability and multiplying their efficiency and efficacy. So why do this really? Well, power outages, particularly in the wintertime, can be at best a nuisance and at worst disastrously costly. Pipes can burst due to lack of heating, which can be incredibly disruptive to the school buildings. So while I'm a major proponent of snow days, they're rather fun. There's something to be said for eliminating needless closures where weather conditions allow for a school to occur, but the school cannot safely operate due to lack of power in the buildings and the resultant lack of heat and lighting. And increasing the campus resiliency and ability to survive a power outage allows for some of the buildings on the campus to potentially serve as shelters, increasing their dedication to the public good. So this graphic here just kind of shows one of the outputs from the REOP program, showing that the system can survive the 168-hour or week-long outage that I specified. I picked a week in winter as that's probably one of the more impactful times that you can have a power outage. So to further illustrate this, I just want to go into this graph here. Jesus, clicked on something. So this graph visually shows how the microgrid performs during the specified power outage. So these sort of yellow-orange peaks here show when there is excess photovoltaic generation. This is sort of the excess energy that is above what is needed by the load demands of the microgrid. So this energy here could be sent into additional storage mediums like additional batteries or that thermal storage. The yellow below the total electric load line, this kind of black line here, shows the total load for this outage. This brighter yellow is when the diesel generator is working. So if you find a way to store this excess photovoltaic generation, then you can even out these peaks and have more dependence on those cheaper, more resilient, renewable resources. So just to show off how long that this microgrid can survive a power outage, as said before, 168 hours is 1 week. And here, through a couple of simulations run by the REOPT program, this system can survive a maximum of 594 hours, which is getting to be pretty close to where the campus is just self-sufficient. this is a graph showing some of the typical operation during a typical week in winter where there isn't a power outage, to contrast with the previous graph showing performance during an outage. So there is an increased load as there more operations, there's more functions need to be online during normal operation, but as is shown, the solar electricity generation can still overproduce for the needs of the campus at times. Again, bringing in that there should potentially be additional storage, and showing that a solar array of this size can pretty much entirely power the campus. This can also be accomplished by potentially electrifying the heat loads to, as will be discussed later, to use more of that solar electricity locally on the campus.
Benjamin,
just to
can I ask
kind of-
you, do you mind if I ask you to go back a slide?
Yeah, which one?
One more,
This one?
there. So I just want to make sure I understand your point here. The 594 hours, I mean, that's over 3 weeks worth of, so we saying that through this method, we'd be able to keep the systems powered for, the better part of 2.5 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, these are very rough calculations. I'm not saying exactly how this should be sized, but using the outputs with this tool and having put in the actual electricity demands of the campus as specified by the figures I put in there, it's saying that simulating a power outage with 50% of a critical load, basically it's using half of the energy because it's a power outage, so not as many of the functions are online. It would be able to survive for that long. It would be on average 317 hours, but with the simulations that this tool ran, the maximum number that it came back with was 594 hours. So it's kind of showing that it's at this point, it'd be pretty close to being self-sufficient, but there would be a point at where the balance between the photovoltaic generation and the storage in the batteries and what the diesel generator is able to supply would eventually kind of diminish down to where it wasn't able to support that 50% critical load.
Thanks, Benjamin. I appreciate it's very fascinating. Thank you.
Just my name, Benjamin, is listed, but that's just because it's my computer.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's actually Brian.
Oh, Ryan, I'm
Yeah,
so
we have-
sorry.
Oh, no,
We have
it's
4
good. Zoom,
laptops
yeah,
set up right
yeah,
now, and we're
there
kind
are-
of switching between them.
There are a great many.
On my
laptops to
computer, it
display.
came up as you're talking as Benjamin, so I apologize.
Yeah, no problem. So are you good on this slide?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so here is a additional energy storage that could potentially be used. So there are fully electric school buses out there, which again is, well, not again, but it's beneficial because the state of Massachusetts is kind of working towards converting all state and heavy vehicles to being fully electric. And through that, the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources is offering a variety of grants for upgrading state vehicles to being fully electric. So as I talked about in that slide with the numbers and how long it was able to survive in power outage, that was with a battery bank installed like in one of the buildings having a capacity of 135 kilowatt hours. But some of these school buses can have a capacity of anywhere from 200 to 250 kilowatt hours. So this allows the battery bank to essentially serve the school, offsetting some of the cost because the bus can transport students. It can also potentially serve as a sort of mobile electricity generator going around to other buildings, because a lot of these school buses have this vehicle to grid capability where they can serve as electricity storage because they can be plugged in, taking electricity from solar panels or just the electricity grid. And then if there is a power outage, they can be plugged in and the power flow can reverse and actually go back and feed the grid. Beverly Schools in Massachusetts had some success with this with over the summer 2021, one of their electric school buses was able to help supply their power grid for more than 50 hours over the course of that summer. So how do we get there? Well, there is a roof replacement plan for the country and woodland schools in 2031 in the capital plan. That's an excellent opportunity to install these rooftop photovoltaic arrays because installing concurrently with a new roof really maximizes the lifespan of the solar array, and it reduces some of the costs and a lot of the disruption for installing solar panels since it's kind of basically like you're already in the roof. Well, you can just add other solar panels then as well. And to touch on whether a system like this, 1200 kilowatt solar array seems to be rather large. Well, touching on some of the feasibility of this, using calculations to figure out the roof area for all of the buildings on the Case campus, even with that number of square footage divided by half to account for any sort of contingency or potential unsuitable areas of the roof, using some standard numbers for the energy density of modern solar arrays, the roof area can support at least a 1300 kilowatt photovoltaic solar array. So this has the potential to offer financial savings over the lifespan of the system. Some of this cost depends on how much financial cost you attribute to there being a power outage on this campus, as this can be kind of a variable thing. But even at its most basic, it can just reduce the electricity bill for the campus and allows for further implementation of energy conscious systems. So to further expand on these energy conscious systems, I'm going to hand it off to Leah to talk more in depth about moving towards a district heating and cooling system. Next slide.
All right. Hi, everyone. So we're proposing some pretty big and exciting changes to the way that buildings within the Case campus are heated and cooled. Similar to our proposed microgrid system, the system connects all the buildings of the Case Energy campus, and it enables the sharing of energy resources between buildings. Our proposed ground source heat pump district system will help meet the decarbonization goal in two different ways. One of those is just say overall operational energy saving, which will also provide cost savings, always a plus. And also, like Brian said, electrification of the heating system, which will enable the transition to renewable energy and can also take advantage of using, if you implement the PV system that we proposed, it can take advantage of using some of that extra production during peak production times. And this system can be implemented in addition to the PV microgrid or just as a standalone solution. So what is a ground source heat pump? Heat pumps utilize refrigerant and the vapor compression cycle to move heat from a source to a sink. And this is the same mechanism that an air conditioner uses for cooling. But a heat pump includes a reversing valve that can reverse this cycle, so it can also provide heating. And a ground source heat pump uses the ground as a heat source or sink. So how does this work? So water circulates through pipes in a geoexchange field. A heat pump in the building uses the compression cycle to exchange heat between this water and the building heating and cooling supply water. What makes this different from other heating and cooling systems? So it can achieve a higher coefficient of performance than a combustion-based heating system, because instead of transforming chemical energy to heat energy, which always involves some degree of loss or inefficiency, it's moving heat energy from one place to another. And also it can provide highly efficient cooling because the heat sink is the ground instead of the air. And the ground is more efficient at transferring heat away. And it also enables full electrification of the heating system, which makes transitioning to renewable energy possible. And it provides heating and cooling with the same system. So there's fewer moving parts and it's simpler, so potentially lower maintenance costs. So there's a couple different configurations for district heating and cooling distribution. One of them is this 4D heating and cooling system. And the characteristics of this are having a centralized energy center with one centralized heat pump that produces hot and chilled water and sends it to individual buildings. There's a single supply water temperature for all buildings, and heating and cooling water are separate. So some advantages of this type of configuration are that there's fewer distributed mechanical systems, so there's fewer moving parts that can break. And the distribution system is designed to minimize heat loss between the plant and buildings, so you can integrate a backup heat source like a boiler. And some disadvantages of this type of system are that since the chilled and heated water are distributed separately, you can't share heat resources from buildings or share heat resources between buildings. You can't move heat from one building to another. So if you have a heating load in one building and a cooling load in another building, you don't have the opportunity to move the unwanted heat from the building that needs cooling to the building that needs heating. And also, all the buildings in the system need to be designed to operate with the same supply water temperature. And another possible configuration is this 5D heating and cooling system. So the way this works is it has this shared ambient ground loop. Water circulates through the geoexchange field, and it's distributed via the ambient ground loop. So the water in the loop is essentially the same temperature as the ground. And each building has an individual water-to-water heat pump to exchange heat between the ambient ground loop and the building supply water. And there's a single loop for both heating and cooling. Heat is extracted from the loop to satisfy heating loads or rejected into the loop to satisfy cooling loads. And advantages of this configuration is that since the water in the loop is basically the same temperature as the ground, there's lower distribution losses, and you can have uninsulated pipe runs and longer pipe runs without worrying about distribution losses. You can effectively share heat resources between buildings, move heat from where you don't need it to where you do need it if you have simultaneous heating and cooling loads. And you can tailor the supply water temperature to each building's individual existing distribution system. Some disadvantages of this is that there's more moving parts because each building has an individual heat pump. And also, since the distribution system is designed for ambient temperature supply water, it's hard to integrate backup or supplementary heating supplies like a boiler because you would be experiencing distribution losses. So what we propose is this hybrid distribution system that combines some characteristics of both systems. And our proposed system has the shared ambient loop distribution with an individual water-to-water heat pump at each building. But we also propose using insulated pipes like the 4D heating and cooling distribution system. So you can use higher temperature supply water without excessive distribution losses. And the advantages of this system are you can tailor the supply water temperature to individual buildings. You can satisfy simultaneous heating and cooling loads. Since you're using insulated distribution pipes, they can be installed at a shallower depth, so that lowers installation costs. And also you can integrate supplemental or backup heat sources like a boiler. And this system also addresses resiliency in a couple ways. So we also propose integrating thermal storage in the form of buffer tanks, which adds a layer of resiliency. And also integrating a gas boiler for backup heating in case of power outages, because I'm sure that would come up as a concern with a proposal to totally electrify the heating system.
Can I ask a general question? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, sure.
How common are systems like that in the Northeast? Is that something that is common or growing or?
We actually have a couple examples coming up in the presentation of
All right, then I'll shut up.
similar systems.
Thank you.
Oh, no, that's totally a valid question. So this diagram shows how these elements fit together. Here's how the components of the system work together. Water is circulated through the geoexchange field, and the ambient temperature water is distributed to the individual buildings through the thermal loop. And at each building, a water-to-water heat pump adds or extracts heat from the water in the ambient loop. The building supply water circulates through the building's distribution system and conditions the space. And in the upcoming slides, I'll be explaining how system performance can be further enhanced by integrating solar thermal heating. And that also has an unexpected side benefit. So stay tuned. So part of our exploration of the feasibility of a district ground source heat pump system involved modeling the heat balance of the system. So remember earlier in the presentation when I said the ground source heat pump system essentially uses Earth as a long-term thermal storage or solar thermal battery? In heating season, heat is extracted from the ground and moved into the building by the ground source heat pump system. And in cooling season, heat is extracted from the building and added to the ground. And if heating and cooling loads are unbalanced, the geoexchange field will gradually become too cold or too hot, and this will reduce the system efficiency. And unbalanced heating and cooling is possible, but it requires an oversized geoexchange field, and this will increase upfront costs. So the less heat the system has available to extract in heating mode, which is more of a concern in this heating dominant climate, the harder it has to work, and this reduces its overall coefficient of performance. So this model reflects current heating demand and projected cooling demand. Calculations are based on re-op load profiles using data from Mass Energy Insight. And as you can see from this graph, the system is highly unbalanced in favor of heating demand and would require a very large geoexchange field, i.e. the system would extract a lot more heat than it adds. So in our heating dominant climate, this is not surprising, but it does create some challenges to implementing a ground source heat pump system. Over time, if we extract more heat than we put in, we'll eventually freeze the geoexchange field, which can reduce coefficient of performance, might require adding antifreeze into the loop, which will further reduce coefficient of performance and also raises the potential for frost heaves. And the graph on this slide demonstrates this in action, and it shows a gradual decrease over time of supply water temperatures for a ground source heat pump system in Montreal. So a typical solution would be to increase the size of the geoexchange field, which this works because it reduces the amount of heat extraction per unit of area and increases the amount of total solar gain to recharge the system during the summer. And the problem with this is space limitations and also cost limitations. The boreholes are usually the most costly component of a ground source heat pump system. Oh, question?
I do have a question, if I may.
Ask away.
So, first of all, so far I love your presentation. I'm a chemical engineer. This is my wheelhouse. So I'm really excited to think about this. One of my questions is, so presumably you don't actually plan on having glycol in the loop, right? You just have plain old water in the loop, yes?
Yep.
So how realistic or unrealistic is it to periodically exchange the water in the heat in an existing heat field, heat sink field, whatever it's called, the field? Is that something you can, I mean, we often have droughts in the summer, so it doesn't seem that
This is a
hard
closed
to
loop system.
like, you know, like spread the water someplace and replace it with a whole, how much water is in this? Is that a reasonable thought process, first of all?
This is a closed loop system. So,
Yes.
you're not changing any water. You're using the same water flowing through closed loops.
I
The
understand,
only
but
thing
I
that's
mean,
exchanging is heat.
oh, I understand that. The part that I'm asking is clearly there is going to be an inlet and an outlet that is possible to access the water in the loop.
Okay.
Not that you would
Yes.
regularly do it, but it has to be
Yes, you
possible
can-
for maintenance
there
alone.
there's ways to get inside the loop if you need to, maybe, because there's always a potential that the water will slowly somehow leak. If there is a leak somewhere in the lines, you can fix it and then you can add water. When it comes to the glycol in the loop, if the geoexchange field does begin to start to freeze a little bit, there is access points where you'd then be able to fill with the glycol, or if you need to top off per se the water, there is access points.
Yeah,
But the loop
yeah, so
itself,
my
Is
question
this a
was really
question-
about this periodic chilling that you expect if the field is too small, right?
No,
Suppose
this is
Weston
not
is,
periodic. So what you have to think about is that you're heat exchanging with a very, very, with the soil, with the ground, very dense material. So these changes happen over a long period of time. The graph you see on the screen is
Yes.
taking place over 10 years with the
yes,
gradual.
that's, right,
overall
my point.
extraction of- Yeah, so that's the problem that the next slide is going to present a solution for.
Well, hang on, I haven't gotten my question answered. So every
Oh.
10 years, you freeze.
No,
No.
you
over
wouldn't design this. You would not want to let this ever happen. This
Correct,
is what
yes.
happens if you
If
have
you
too
did-
small of a field.
Right, right. If you have too small of a field and you did it, which would sound to be stupid, would you be able to, at the 10-year event, when you start freezing up, change the water?
You can change the water, but you wouldn't be solving your other problems. If you're freezing the ground, you
Uh-huh.
may be causing frost heaves that could actually
Uh-huh.
break your pipes. You could
Okay.
be destroying the sports field that's sitting on top of it.
Yeah,
It's
so
not,
this
it's not
answers my-
something we want to do.
This answers my question. So if you let the ground get too cold, clearly then the glycol would also not fix that. So,
Right.
okay. Thank you. Now
Yeah,
you may move on. Sorry.
Yeah, the ground is the long-term thermal storage medium, and the water is just the distribution medium. It's more of a
Yeah.
short term.
Yes, I do understand that. Yeah.
I originally thought the question was like, if there's a drought or something, can you just like, and you need to like water the garden, can you just tap into this and get some water from there?
No, it was me asking, can we discharge the water if we wanted to exchange it? That was, yeah. So I hope you, and I really am a chemical engineer. Most of this is not difficult to understand for me, but I really appreciate the way you're presenting this. So thank you for the next solution. I look forward to seeing
Oh,
that.
no, I'm a little intimidated.
That's
Well,
not
I'll carry
intentional.
on. All right, so solar thermal hot water heating is a possible solution for this heat balance problem. And these two graphs show that in action. So case one, the graph that was on the last slide, shows this gradual decrease in temperature of the water circulating through the field over time. And case two, which is this new graph, shows how it would look with the addition of solar thermal hot water heating. And you can actually see there's a very gradual temperature increase. So solar thermal hot water heating can provide supplemental heat to the system and bring it closer to being balanced. This diagram illustrates how solar thermal can be used to directly heat buildings and also recharge the geoexchange field. So effectively, you're preheating the ground for winter. So however, solar thermal collectors represent a significant investment. So how can we get some additional value out of them? I'll let Adrian explain.
all right, so we were thinking, how could we utilize this resource to the best of our to the best capability we have? And as we were looking at Google Earth, we saw this massive pool. So we figured we would add some solar thermal pool heating, right? So the solar thermal is commonly used for pools in the heating season. And there's plenty of precedent for heating pools with solar thermal. The system can extend swimming season and enhance the user experience, all with 100% renewable energy from the sun, of course. But there's only one catch, and that is if you do this and you don't invite us, we will be very upset. So keep that in mind. So we based this, we based the size of our solar thermal array on an April 15th to Halloween swimming season, but it could be downsized for a shorter season extension if wanted, or even potentially expanded if you want to swim for longer. And as you can see from the graph, the solar thermal hot water heating season adds additional heat to the system throughout the year. So right here, this is the heat to the geoexchange field in kilowatt hours of thermal energy. And in the summertime, the solar field provides obviously a lot more energy, and this is all of that heat energy that can go to heating the pool. And as you can see right here, the heat to the geoexchange remains quite constant throughout the year, so you're not really going to lose too much heat when you are heating that pool. So you'll be able to charge that, earth battery, as we've been kind of calling it, all year. Whoops. Okay, so there are some precedents for existing similar systems. This system has been in use for about 10 years in Drake Landing at Okotoko's, Alberta. And what's impressive about this system is that it uses the 5D heating and cooling, but there are no need for subsequent bespoke building heat pumps. This system works so well. In fact, its coefficient of performance is at about 32, which means that the heat from the geoexchange field just gets pumped directly into the residencies. They don't need to supplement it with other heat pumps, and it just holds holds energy very well throughout the year and provides all the heating needs for this residency. Another precedent for this is Whistler Village in British Columbia, and this is an example of another 5D heating and cooling system where they use a boiler as a backup for supplemental heating when in emergency conditions, or if it's just simply needed. This is also another great example of something we have proposed for the Weston thermal loop system. As we have mentioned, we want to try to integrate 4D and 5D heating and cooling into one system with that supplementary boiler to provide that extra heating. And a third precedent here is in South Jutland, I would say Denmark. And this is a great example of a solar thermal collector array. So this is a 70,000 square meter solar thermal array, which is about 7 square kilometers. And it serves 46% of the heating load for over 200 residences in this residency area. This is it's a heating dominated climate in Denmark. Clearly, it's on a similar latitude as Massachusetts. And this has been operating well for the past 7 years, making it a great example of solar thermal heating capability. All right, I'm gonna hand it back to Leah to talk about her review and assessment of this system. Leah?
All right, so we also compared coefficient of performance between similar solar assisted ground source heat pump systems. And as you can see from this bar graph, they achieved an average coefficient of performance of 4.48, meaning the system outputs 4.48 units of energy for every 1 unit of energy it consumes, which is excellent. And a comparison of payback periods for similar systems showed a range of 9 to 15 years with an average of around a 12-year payback period.
Yeah, that's good. Get a clip. There you go.
There we go. So with the addition of solar thermal, this is what the heat balance model for the proposed system looks like. So what does this mean for the system? Oh, come on. Oh my goodness. Sorry, technical difficulties. So with solar thermal contribution, the ground source heat exchange system would be about 81% balanced. And this means that the system can be downsized by about 62%. So we're going from 640 boreholes down to 240. And the field adjacent to field school would be the ideal site for the geoexchange field because it's central to the district. So that minimizes piping distance, and also it's compact, so that minimizes excavation costs. A ground source heat pump system is still possible without the supplemental solar thermal if these alternative solutions are implemented. Alternative solutions would be adding a second geoexchange field. A possible site for that would be this field next to Country School, or you could reduce heating loads by implementing building level energy efficiency measures. For example, envelope measures like air sealing, insulating, upgrading windows, mechanical measures like heat recovery ventilation, or changes in building controls like increasing unoccupied temperature setbacks. And the best solution would be to combine efficiency measures with a cost-optimized geoexchange field and a reduced solar thermal array designed for a shorter swimming season extension. And this would require some more detailed study to determine the optimal solution in terms of cost and energy savings. And now we're going to hear from Brian, who will be explaining his excellent diagram of how this all fits together.
Thanks, Leah. So just want to quickly touch on this because you'll have other slides. You can go back and look at this in more detail if you want. But this kind of just graphically represents how this might look conceptually on like a geographical basis, kind of showing how like the solar thermal and geoexchange relates to all of the other buildings. So on there, there's a proposed energy center, which is sort of like the nucleus of the whole system, because it will serve as sort of a distribution center for the heating and cooling energy. You have a question, Katharina?
I do have a question. It is still related to what the previous presenter spoke about, but now that I'm already distracted, the solar canopy over the pool parking lot is freaking genius, because when you go to the pool, you actually end up with a wicked hot car at the end of the day. And I texted this in the chat that a lot of residents have talked about heating that pool, which I've always dismissed as ridiculous waste of energy. So this sounds like a really good plan to me. But the question I really meant to ask was related to the payback period. A lot of what is happening here is so inspiring, and I'm not a very patient person. Also, I'm usually the resident pessimist, so this is unusual for me. My one thought was that what your temperature projections are relying on in terms of, I mean, the world is only getting hotter, which sounds like it's going to push the balance in our favor. Over time, we will need presumably less heat and maybe even more air conditioning, right? As temperatures rise, which is at this point inevitable. And then Gary's not going to like this question very much. The capital plan plans for the school re-roofing to happen at a certain point in time. And I would be really interested in the financial aspect of accelerating that. Like, at what point would the turnaround happen? Like, because we have experienced in the past that stuff like incentives can be like coming and going in time, and sometimes the sooner we act, the more advantageous it can be. So not to make Gary sweat too much, but this, if you guys have answers, that would be great. Or if not, we can maybe talk about it again some other time. So that is the sum total of my thoughts. Thank you.
All right, yeah, we do get into calculations of payback period for our proposed.
So Leah, let me just answer that just briefly. So we get into a lot of calculations. We did not use alternative weather files for like some projected 20 years, 50 years in the future. I still haven't found a reliable way that I trust that says that projection is any better than another projection. So we used standard weather files, but you're right, it is going to get hotter, and I think even more importantly, more humid. So those are characteristics that should be considered, that do work in the favor of balance. The other thing to consider, though, is that any of these envelope measures that also work in the favor of balance by reducing the heating load, any of those envelope measures can be implemented at any time, and they will always have a benefit. In fact, they pay back better if you're assuming that you've got a crappy old boiler and you're burning a fuel than if you've got a really highly efficient heat pump and you're, and you're using energy so efficiently that your energy savings don't save you a whole lot of money.
This is such a good point. So we don't have to wait for the solar on the roofs to start any transition.
No. And the other thing about solar PV is that it has gone through its learning curve, its technical learning curve, which means that it's not going to get a lot cheaper. It's already cheap.
I was mostly, that was relating to Leon's question earlier. Has another school district already done this? And in our experience, like grant availability is, I think, more advantageous if you're more on the leading edge than on the,
I think that's true.
sleeper
I
at the
think
end
that-
of the train. Like, so
So I
anyway,
do
enough
wanna give you
interrupting on
guys
my
time
side. I
to
really
finish their
appreciate this.
presentation.
Yes.
All right, so
Yeah.
back to Brian.
Yeah, so just to finish this off, or this slide, I'm finishing off this slide. It basically shows how everything is, how all the buildings kind of become interconnected. And the energy center is sort of a distribution and energy center, because that can be where a place where new battery banks can be installed. It can be where a new central diesel generator is installed. It can be where the backup boiler is installed. So it can be a place where all of basically the energy distribution can just be centralized, potentially easing on maintenance. So just to kind of illustrate sort of how everything can be interconnected, the energy center can basically just help regulate the ambient loop or the water loop there. So imagine that the Woodland School is calling for heat. Well, to use an example from when we first met with the town here, the field school sometimes will overheat in the winter because of the south-facing glass. So the field school can be rejecting heat and sending it into the loop. The energy center can then pull it out and send it over to the Woodland School. So basically, you're getting free heat of the Woodland School while also simultaneously cooling the field school. So it's kind of can be beneficial to even everything else. So back to Leah.
So heating and cooling systems can be kind of broken down into three basic components: generation, distribution, and emitters. We've already covered generation and distribution with the geoexchange field and the thermal loop. And existing building level distribution systems and most existing emitters can be used because all buildings already use water as a heat distribution medium. But there's some changes to the emitters that are necessary to make our proposed ground source heat pump system possible. Heat pumps need to operate at a lower temperature, supply water temperature than a hydronic system with a boiler. And decreasing the temperature lift that the heat pump has to do increases the coefficient of performance for the heat pump. As illustrated by the graph on this slide, and increasing the surface area of heat emitters so supply water temperature can be lowered will make heating with the ground source heat pump possible. So how does this work out in practice? Here's some changes we recommend to the existing building HVAC equipment to make ground source heat pump heating and cooling possible. Replace or retrofit air handling units with units equipped with heat recovery to decrease heat loss from ventilation, which will lower heating demand. Add more fan coils. Replace fin tube radiators with fan coils so a distribution system can provide cooling without condensation issues. And add condensate drip pans to fan coils and classroom unit ventilators to collect condensation when the system is in cooling mode. And here's some example fixtures. And now back to Adrian.
Thank you again, Leah. So moving forward from here, I know that was a lot of sciencey, technical, energy, electricity related mumbo jumbo, but here's what this means for the capital plan. So the Case capital plan already has things like air handling units and rooftop units to be systematically replaced and upgraded in the coming years. There's boiler replacement scheduled. There's a roof replacement like we talked about. So the existing capital plan already has all these different staged places where money is effectively going to be spent. So for instance, $1.5 million for boiler replacement. Why not take that money and try to spend it on something a little bit better? So this is the implementation schedule of the different systems we proposed. So the first thing you want to do is lower that water temperature. And what lowering that water temperature does, it allows things like the heat pumps to work better, the ground source heat exchanger to operate at that lower operating temp, and the thermal loop to operate as it needs to. So once the thermal loop is installed, which is something you'd want to do first, along with lowering the water temperature as seen in this chart, you can then install the heat pumps, and then you can install the solar pool heater, which will supplement the ground source heat exchanger and go into the thermal loop, et cetera, et cetera. As you can see on the bottom, the photovoltaic system is just one big bar, meaning you can basically, like Katerina said, you can just expedite that. You can do that whenever you want, because that's just simply replacing the roof, putting the solar panel array on, and then basically plugging it into your system. So moving on from there, we got some rough financial estimates. I'll let you kind of look this over as I talk through it real quickly. So this is for the solar thermal system on its own. So first we got the base case, which Leah explained, where you have a lot more boreholes, which make the geoexchange system a lot more expensive with no solar thermal. And there are your prices, payback years, 17.5 years, savings to investment ratio. And then you have it with solar thermal, drops the number of boreholes, but you have to spend money to install the solar thermal. And then it makes it, and then you come out to not, saving more money, a little bit better payback period, but the overall goal here, or the overall thing we're trying to show, is that they're similar, and these are very ballpark rough financial estimates. So let's talk about energy real quick. This is a global price of energy index over the past 20 years of aggregate sources of energy like gas, electricity, oil, what have you. As you can see, it's not a straight line. It's very much zigzaggy. It goes up, down, left, and right, because energy in our society is commoditized. So it has varying values depending on different factors in the world, in the market, etc. So this is natural gas versus electricity. As you can see on the left, natural gas, the real nominal prices have kind of been haywire over the past, 20 years? Whereas electricity, on the other hand, has remained more or less stable. It increases a little bit over time, and the nominal and the price adjusted for inflation, which is the real price, follows it pretty well. So this basically, what we're trying to explain here is that if you're using heating systems that rely on commoditized energy like gas, you're not really insulating yourself well from shifts in price. Whereas electricity, even though you're generating it on site from the sun, the cost of that still remains quite constant throughout history, or at least recent history. So here's a quick summary of all the recommendations. So this is the PV array with battery backup, the ground source heat pump district system, this district system with the solar hot water, and then everything all together. So if you wanted to do individual ones, or if you wanted to do it all together, this gives you a great little spread of price figures. And again, this is a very rough estimate. These figures are not super in depth. This is all from Reopt and the data that we took from there. So I can leave this up for a quick sec if anyone has questions about it.
I have a quick question. Do you know anything about like the cost of maintenance or maintenance reduction that may come from implementing something like this? Has anyone?
So I don't know if you remember, but earlier we mentioned when you're using something like a district loop, we have individual heat pumps in all the buildings, which means there's more distributed systems, which means there's more moving parts, which means there is the potential for more maintenance. Whereas a traditional 4D heating and cooling, which is basically just sending hot water when there's heating season and not sending anything cooling season in this case, there's going to be less maintenance costs there, but it comes down to how much you're saving in not spending money on these commoditized energy sources, because you're generating everything on site. And as you can see, these payback periods for these things, they're pretty, one of them's sub 10 years, they're all under 20 years, which is pretty attractive. And for the final option, the emissions reduction is close to 85%, meaning for every 100 tons of carbon you produce on site, you're now producing only 15.
Can I interject a response on the subject of maintenance? So the key difference so when you want to compare the system, you want to kind of compare it against the alternative, and the alternative is maintain the existing boilers. So boilers require a fair amount of maintenance. And also you've got to imagine that you're going to demand cooling. And if you use a heat exchanger with the air, right, all those fan blades that are out exposed in the elements, generally speaking, in terms of durability, an air source heat pump or regular DX cooling has a lifespan of maybe 15 years, and typically water source or ground source heat pumps, because they are entirely indoors, and so they're in a controlled environment, they tend to last 20, 30, 40 years. Generally they outlast the refrigerant that they're allowed to use.
Also, water source heat pumps generally consume less electricity because it takes a lot less energy to move water than it does to move larger volumes of air. So that's something to consider as well.
Also, if I can say something, if I recall correctly, the re-opt output that I used for this payback calculation for the PV system did factor in the cost of maintenance into their calculations. And I did get a little bit into the capital plan, and one thing I noticed is there's about $1.6 million budgeted in the next 10 years just to replace boilers.
Yeah. So those, like I mentioned before, why not use that money and try to supplement a more resilient system that aims to achieve Weston's future goals. So lastly, why do this? Moving to implement the entire recommendation allows for the highest return on the socioeconomic investment. So you're getting, over time, you're getting cheaper and cheaper costs. You're looked at as an example for other schools, and you're keeping up to date with legislation from feds and state for more green infrastructure. As all the systems mentioned work together and become more efficient as more components are installed, right? So as the solar PV helps to supplement the energy for the heat pumps in the buildings, and then the pool helps to hold solar thermal energy for the thermal loop, and all the more everything is installed, the better they can work in synergy. So this type of holistic solution can serve as a model for some of the campuses, as I just said, and areas in the state, and prepares the campus in Weston as a whole for the transition away from fossil fuels, which is inevitable, right? So something like this is a very, very forward thinking, and something that is going to have to happen one way or another in the future. So be proactive, save the planet, and go green. Any questions? We got a little bit of time for questions.
I have one more question. It's about the comparable examples that you had. I think 2 of them were in Canada. One was in Finland.
Yes.
Denmark.
Denmark. Thank you. So those examples, did you just pick those based on similar climate types, or are those like the only precedents that are out there? Like, are there?
No, there are plenty of other precedents. These ones just highlighted different aspects of what we're trying to introduce to Weston. So like I said, for Drake Landing, it's a great example of a ground source heat exchanger being so efficient, having a coefficient of performance of 32, meaning you put $100 worth of electricity into it, you get $3,200 worth of heating out of it. This is one way to look at it. This example shows how you can supplement a system like this with a backup boiler. And then the third example shows how you can do all of that with the solar thermal collectors. So they're all individual examples of how they could all potentially work together.
Okay,
Yeah, I think
awesome.
a better representation is actually, I think, maybe the next slide that Leah talked through, because that's essentially using multiple cases. So rather than saying, oh, here are a few examples, which we wanted to use to illustrate the different characteristics, this is saying here are a whole bunch of cases.
Yeah, as you can see down here, these are all the different places.
Lovely, thank you.
Of course, yeah. Anyone else? Questions?
This is Neil Duffy. Sorry, I came in late. I'm with Green Communities. I just had a quick question about, I think it was like slide like 47. It's just a clarifying question. I just didn't understand this schedule. Like, what am I looking at the bottom there? What are those numbers? Is that?
Oh, those, okay, so those numbers, in order to create this graph, I had them whited out. Those numbers don't really pertain to
Got it.
anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, is
It's
that
just kind of
days,
showing-
years?
In Excel, it was days, but it's more, this chart is more so just to show what needs
The
to happen.
phasing. Got it.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's whenever it starts, these are the things that start first.
Precisely.
Got it. That's what I thought. I just didn't understand it. That's great. Thanks.
Totally.
So ideally, would you want like the same consultant working on this entire plan, like in your opinion, or do you think like we could work separately on all of these? Like, is there any, I assumed there was like a lot of integration between these systems.
There is, the photovoltaic system you could probably do separately, that
Right.
for sure, because that's just
Okay.
electricity generation and installation. When it comes to ground source heat, I mean, the larger systems, you're gonna have one company probably, or one consult tell you how large your ground source heat exchange is gonna be. Someone else will tell you your thermal loop size and, you know, pipe diameters and runs and whatnot. Lowering the water temperature, that, and upgrading your emitters, that's more just calculations, and you could probably have one of the consultants working on the ground source heat exchange or thermal loop also do that, as well as the heat pumps. So there's the,
Or your own HVAC contractor, because you can do it anytime.
exactly.
Wonderful, thank you.
If we have no more questions, I think that's all we have prepared for you today.
Oh, is there any question? Oh, what about the chat? There might be questions in there.
Oh, of course, good call, Leah.
There was a question from Jeff that makes sense, but I think it's Gary who can answer it about how easy it would be for our existing buildings to be converted. Because I don't think we have much forced hot air heating, correct?
Correct. It's all based on circulated hot water. One of the questions, well, I don't really have a question, but you know, in thinking about it, we currently have all the buildings have a generator. There's 2 diesel, which are the Woodland Country, the Case Field and Community Center have natural gas. And they tend to last a long time because they're only standby generators. So when you were talking about what the backup generator would be, is there, and I'm all about redundancy, and Carrie and I take no offense of replacing equipment before it's due, as long as everybody's on board. You know, me as facilities, you know, I tend, and things can last longer than their life expectancy with good maintenance, which we try to do here. And these generators can last a long time. Would it, if we start to implement this, could all the generators be put into, like, say we do get a battery system and it's last resort, the generation that would act to either charge the batteries if need be in an emergency or supplement that?
So,
Yes,
Let's let Brian.
yeah, Brian can
Yeah,
cover
I was
this. This is his bread and
I was
butter.
gonna say, so with the generators, basically it doesn't, it almost sort of doesn't matter whether how many of them you have, because at a base level, introducing all of this renewable generation from the sun and also using the batteries, it can just reduce the amount of load that they have to supply. So it'd be almost equivalent to having like one of the generators going. It basically just reduces the amount of fuel that they use, reduces the amount of on time that the generators have. So if you just keep all the ones that are existing, you can do that, and will just extend their lifespan even further. So and then also, like, at worst, you have too many generators, and then you have redundancy upon redundancy upon redundancy, and it would almost survive until the end of the world at a certain point.
And that's just another great example of how the existing infrastructure in the building ties into what we want to do, which was definitely a paramount part of our goal to achieve on this site.
Yeah, so just kind of talking about how all the system that we are recommending can really tie into a lot of what's already there. We did do a little bit of a dive into the heating systems that currently exist, and as Gary said, a lot of them are hydronic, and there is room there to either like expand some of those systems with the classroom unit ventilators, or there are some places where there are already existing radiative fin tubes, and there's room to basically you can just add more heating surface area, and that would be how you would reduce the amount of water temperature that you need.
I want to clarify on the existing heating systems and how they integrate. So for the most part, you have hydronic heating systems and no cooling system. And this is a proposal to use your existing piping. Most of these are 2-pipe systems, so you just send around hot water. Use the existing piping and the existing heat emitters, plus some additional fan coil units. So you'd want to clip out your radiation where you don't have the ability to collect condensate. And that allows you to use the same system to do heating and cooling. Now, in those systems where you have 2-pipe systems instead of 4-pipe systems, you can't do simultaneous heating and cooling, right? You have to switch from one to the other, but that's better than what you have now. In the field school, you have rooftop units that serve the classrooms that have DX cooling right now. So that's cooling with heat exchange to the air and direct gas-fired heating. So those are ones that right now would essentially not integrate with the system at all. And for the time being, or until you felt the need to replace them, they would operate just as they always have. And they have the cooling, they have the heating. It's not tied in with the system. Over time, you could replace those rooftop units with ones that do integrate directly with the system. And those ones would probably be ones that have heat pumps built into them. Rather than using the circulating loop, they would actually use directly the water from the energy system, the thermal loop for the whole system. But yeah, that's kind of the details of each of these individual building types.
Let's see.
Is there anything anyone's unclear on? Any further questions into?
I was just going to
Some in the
answer
chat.
Jeff's. I was just going to answer Jeff's question here about savings on load reduction. Yeah, there totally would be savings from load reduction on extreme hot or cold days. So to sort of relate this to some of the existing systems, the chiller on top of the library aims to only charge itself with ice during the nighttime when energy costs are low. Well, it's the same sort of thing where if you store all of this electricity energy with the renewable sources, when you have those extreme hot or cold days when there would probably be peak charges from just everyone else using their electricity, you have all of this energy stored already, and you can just use that before having to resort to pulling from the grid at an increased cost. So definitely would reduce costs by kind of evening out the peaks of energy needs.
And actually, since it's on this slide, I'll answer Jeff's question. So those things look just like those mini splits, but they are not. Mini splits have refrigerant moving back and forth. This is actually connected directly to the hot or cold water piping that's already existing in the building.
So it's just the air interface piece of the of a mini split, if you will, not the condenser.
Yeah, it looks like it's got the same form factor, right? You can go in the ceiling, you can go on the wall, or in the kind of the middle picture, it can kind of look just like a unit ventilator.
It helps. I mean, if it's on an outside wall like that, you have a solution for your condensate though, right? Because otherwise that can be a real issue with some of these retrofits.
Yeah, we right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, drip pan.
Yeah, or whatever. I found with some of these retrofits, I mean, trying to figure out if you're introducing cooling, what you do with the the water, the condensate can be. I've seen it be a challenge, depending on the project. So
it can. Generally speaking, for these schools, they mostly have exterior walls. That's probably where you would. That's also where the piping is going to get to the unit ventilator. So you're tapping into the same piping, and then you've got condensate. In some cases, you may need condensate pumps to move it from one place to another. But that's essentially not rocket science.
No.
Okay, any other questions or ideas? And we will share with you guys a PDF of this presentation and our calculations, so you can kind of see the source of it. Oh, I see Neil has his head up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say quickly, I mean, thanks for this great presentation. Just making sure, I think everyone on the town side knows, but just that the incentives for heat pumps have really exploded in the current 3-year plan. I mean, they're like 10 times what they used to be. So the economics of these types of systems is changed drastically, even from like if we had this conversation, 3 months ago, or last year. So just keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that the Green Communities grants, we now have the decarbonization category grant, which is $500,000. So like almost every phase of this project would probably fit into that category if you are starting to pursue this. And then the last thing I would say is just, I know the utilities are exploring and in some cases going into sort of implementation of district systems and looking for opportunities to sort of pilot district systems. So I think it's worth reaching out to Eversource like now and finding out like what sort of technical assistance they may provide or interest they would have in supporting something like this, because I know it's something that everyone's trying to figure out how we do this sort of on, scale these things. So I just wanted to add those comments, and thanks again.
Thanks, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, if no one has any further comments or, oh, you're sharing the screen, that's right. Or ideas, then we'll call an end to the meeting. And I really appreciate everyone giving this attention. There was a lot in this, I know. And I hope to kind of be back in touch with you and help you work through it as you kind of work on the different components. So with that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for listening to our presentation.